Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's Redshift webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about the upcoming changes to Mailcheck and what UK public sector organisations need to know about the changes that are coming into effect at the end of March. For those that don't know me, my name is Billy McDermott. I'm the Senior Director of Sales Engineering here at Redshift. Thankfully, it's not just me that's going to be giving you advice today. I'm delighted to be joined by my friends and colleagues. We have Raoul Power, who is the CEO and co-founder of Redshift, and we have Kieran Martin, who is the former CEO of the National Cyber Security Centre, which we all know in the UK as the NCSC. Kieran, would you like to just take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself in more detail to the audience?
Thank you, Billy. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. I'm Kieran Martin. I am talking to you from Oxford, where I was teaching cybersecurity this morning at the university. I also work with various cybersecurity companies, including Redshift, with whom I've had a long partnership, as we'll discuss, both in and out of public office, because one of the things that I'm proudest of that we achieved in the last decade when we set up the National Cybersecurity Centre and rolled it out was a series of either free or cheap, but hopefully always useful services to help organizations that didn't have the mega bucks, that didn't have lots of the high level expertise and operational firepower of some of the big corporate defenders, but had huge cybersecurity vulnerabilities and real risk to themselves, to their users, to their customers. We had a series of services known as the Active Cyber Defense Program. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. That made a real difference, and Redshift has been a long-time partner in doing that. So delighted to be here today, and thanks for having me.
Wonderful, and it's great to have you here and great to see you again. And Raoul, would you mind taking a couple of minutes to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Billy. I'm Rahul. As Billy described, this is my venture, my third actually in the UK. Having worked in technology businesses all my life, I wanted to build something so similar to what Kieran was alluding to. How do we make technology more effective and safer for everyone, whatever scale they might be at, and how do we make that work for them? So I think we originally connected on this shared vision. We're obviously here as a venture-backed company in the private sector, but with a very similar objective, because every organization, whether a commercial business or a small public sector organization, deserves to have the best technology to ensure that they can actually weather this digital transformation that we're all going through. So excited to be here. Happy to chat about how we can help support with these changes afoot.
Thank you, Raoul. And just to add, the work that we do with public sector customers here at Redshift, which we'll talk a little bit more about later on, is one of the reasons why I love what we do. We have significant experience working in the sector, and these problems are what we solve on a day-to-day basis, and it's what excites me, and that's why I love working with Kieran and Raoul on these type of challenges. So for me, this is really exciting, what we're going to talk about today. First of all, we're going to kick off and explain what the changes are to the Mailcheck program. Everyone who has joined us today will have some awareness of what is happening, but perhaps you won't understand the reasons why it's actually happening. We will then talk about how you can adapt and what you are actually able to do to ensure that your email remains protected following the changes. And then finally, we'll talk about any solutions that we can offer to help simplify the transition, and the advice and the processes that we can support you with to make this easy. Any questions as we go to the audience, please put them into the chat. Our moderators will make sure that they're flagged up to us, just in case one of us isn't actually checking the screen. And naturally, if there's anything that we don't manage to answer during the session, we'll make sure and come back to you after, as we have all of your contact details. So let's get on to the really exciting part. Kieran, can I hand over to you and so you can tell the audience a bit more about what MailCheck currently is?
So MailCheck was and remains one of the original programs of the Active Cyber Defense Initiative. Let me just say a little bit about the Active Cyber Defense Initiative because it's fundamental to the way we approach cybersecurity in this country, and I think has stood the test of time as a real positive, particularly for the public sector, but also in the private sector too. Now, if I have one regret about Active Cyber Defense, it's the name, because this is a profession and a discipline of cybersecurity that's dominated by the United States. And in the United States, active cyber defense basically means blowing stuff up or at least destroying some infrastructure. For us, active cyber defense was the opposite of passive. There was lots of stuff around, let's build public-private partnerships. Our question was to do what? Let's share information. Again, our question was to do what? And a fundamental insight, I think, at the time the NCSC was stood up, and this wasn't particularly my insight, it was a very much a shared cross-government one, was that there were a whole bunch of what you might call digital pollutants that for whatever reason nobody was fixing. And some of them were quite basic and some of them weren't particularly glamorous. So you look at some of these and it's quite a technical audience, so people will know what DMARC, the authentication protocol are, they'll know what the sender policy framework is and so forth. But a lot of these things just weren't being applied. Elsewhere in the active cyber defense forest, there were millions of websites being hosted in the UK that contained malicious code and nobody was taking them down. And what we were looking at the NCSC was, we said, where the market, where private actors, for whatever reason, aren't fixing this, we'll try and find a way of fixing it by the government with a private sector partner if that's what it takes. So, for example, in the field of automatic takedowns of malicious websites, no one's ever going to have a commercial incentive to do that. So the government hires a contractor to help them automate the request to website holders and so forth. It's got dramatic impact, and that's still going. With MailCheck, which is an umbrella for assessing email security compliance, I think there were two features. One was make it sort of generally available and show people how to do it, but the other was essentially to sort of impose it in a friendly way on the public sector. All the best practice guidance should be doing this, but here's how you do it. Now, unlike, say, the automatic takedowns, we always felt this really should be something that people are prepared to buy. And the NCSC, the government, should only really be involved in those activities that only the government can do. So in August 2024, my successors at the NCSC moved to Active Cyber Defense 2.0, which basically says they're going to sort of not stop it, but perhaps narrow it a little bit. So at the moment, this is something that really helps people, and it sounds almost in this language, as rather sort of passive. It helps you assess compliance, but it also, what it really does in totality is that it says you're doing all this stuff, it's working, it's reducing the dodgy interfaces that you have with the online pollutants and so forth, and it's being done for you in a way that the users find very easy. And it's available to all central government, local authorities, devolved administrations, the NHS, which is, of course, nearly 11% of the economy, and more. I'll stop there.
So, Kieran, why then, in that case, is MailCheck support actually changing?
Pretty much for the reasons that I've already covered. This is something that there is... I would encourage people to read the blog by Ollie Whitehouse, the Chief Technology Officer of the NCSC, and Jonathan Ellison, the Director of Critical Infrastructure Protection, of the 2nd of August 2024, where they say they introduce Active Cyber Defense 2.0. And this is basically, look, parts of this can now be freestanding. If you look at, for example, I know I'm slightly preempting a later discussion, the DMARC aggregate collection stuff. Well, there are now regulations that didn't exist in 2016 through the Common Assessment, through the CAF, the assessment framework, where you have to do this anyway. There are much clearer business needs that weren't really understood bias 8-10 years ago, which we now have to do. So in essence, and again, if I think back to my old job at the NCSC and I think of my interactions with my friend Rahul, one of the things I used to feel guilty about when I was in government office was, we should be encouraging the commercial players because we should be focusing and sharpening the government's interventions on exactly those bits of the problem set where there isn't a sort of market. And that's why I think, the blog post, and I see somebody's asked for a link. I can absolutely put the link in. Well, thank you, Jack, for already doing that. I think that's where we always intended to be, and that's where we're getting to now.
Great. And so exactly what is changing now? What does it currently do, actually? And what is changing in MailCheck? Because support isn't being pulled completely for what MailCheck currently does.
No, that's right. So you can see, I think, that on this slide that MailCheck will continue. And, this is continue to check and alert for DMARC policy strengths for errors, for sender policy framework effectiveness. I mean, this is all quite a big deal. I know some people find the MTA STS requirements a little bit of a pain. They're still being done. So there's an awful lot. There's an awful lot still there. I mean, essentially, what's not being supported is the DMARC aggregate reporting. That's by far the biggest part of this. There's also the DMARC and DKIM insights and the TLS reporting. But again, if you look at trends in the market, you look at trends in regulation, you look at trends in cyber defense best practice for the last few years. I mean, these are now, I think, to be fair to the government, because this isn't my decision. It was a framework that I set up, and we aimed for this point. We finally got there. But these are things really that organizations, are now standard practice that's well served by the private sector.
And that's one observation from my side as well. Both the maturity of the solutions that are available within the private sector, but also the maturity of the government departments and the arm's length bodies who are adopting these standards and implementing them since MailCheck was brought to the market. The knowledge and experience of the teams that are using these tools, that are deploying them, that are configuring them, is so far ahead of where it was, and a great deal of credit must go to NCSC for that, in terms of helping people along the way, and helping people that are trying to keep us as taxpayers safe do the best job.
Well, I mean, and just to come in on that, I think it is the most profound and fundamental importance that, as well as doing the sort of cool stuff at the threat intelligence end, of the anomaly detection end and so forth, that particularly in the public sector, because our citizens have no choice but to interact with public authorities, they have to do it. In some cases, they have to do it by law. So to have a set of much safer interfaces at scale by doing simple things very, very well is absolutely crucial. And I'm really pleased that the Active Cyber Defense Program and MailCheck have reached this level of maturity, because it's a long slog. This wasn't sexy, this wasn't glamorous, but it's absolutely transformatively important.
It's definitely still not sexy or glamorous, but it definitely is still important, 100%. So, Raoul, we've been talking about what MailCheck is, the reasons why it is changing, but let's move on to a bit more of the details. Kieran's spoken about what was included, but let's talk about why it's important, in particular the biggest change, which is the deprecation of DMARC reporting. Why is DMARC reporting so important, and why should our audience and others in the public sector be ensuring that they continue with this part of their email defense?
Yeah, sure, Billy. So I was laughing there because certainly when we talk about the grunt work that has to do with getting the basics right, in many ways DMARC is the poster child for that. And like the NCSE, we've been cracking at it since 2017, I believe. So we've seen our fair share of DMARC reports and organizational challenges over that period of time. I'm going to assume that most people are joining MailCheck webinar about DMARC. They already know a lot about DMARC reporting. So I'm not going to labor the point, but for anyone who's not up to speed, DMARC reporting is actually a very unique kind of telemetry that's available on the internet today. It's a standard that every single large mailbox provider on the planet, whether in the UK or outside, support. And it basically says, I'm going to create logging for you that is going to tell you how I perceive your email. And that's a pretty special thing. There's no way for an organization, to go to a Google and say, hey, what messages am I purporting to send to you, whether they're legitimate messages or not, and what is the metadata associated with each of those messages. The internet kind of had to come together and put an RFC to say, okay, this is useful data, because if we do want to do threat intelligence, configure our security protocols correctly so that we can authenticate every message, this data is incredibly valuable. But we need a scalable way to do this for all the millions of organizations and businesses that are out there sending billions of messages a day. We need some sort of technology solution, right? This isn't a message board that we need to put together. So how is this going to work? So DMARC took a long time to put together, took a long time to deploy. But by about 2017, 2018, a lot of the mail receivers out there were reporting it, which means that every time they get an email that purports to come from a particular domain, they're going to log a whole bunch of metadata about it. For the most part, no PII, just a lot of technical metadata that allows an organization to, if they query that, to actually understand what email is being sent on behalf of the domain. And they can use that for two purposes. The primary purpose is actually to implement DMARC. So even today, we see a lot of organizations think by just doing DMARC reporting, that is getting aggregate reports and processing them, they are doing DMARC. That's not what it's for. That reporting is there so that organizations can understand all of their authentication, the DKIM, the SPF, all of the various authentication mechanisms that are out there, and understand if they're correctly configured for all their legitimate email. Once that's done, they can actually publish some sort of compliance standard. So rather than just saying reporting, they can tell each one of these anonymous mail receivers, wherever they are, to say, everything that genuinely comes from me is authentic and exhibits these signals that you can technically check. Continue to log, but block anything from going to an end user's inbox that is not authentically from me. And now you have a way of checking that. So once you've deployed this level of DMARC enforcement, which is required as per NCSE's own standards, and I'm pretty sure everyone on this call is aware of it. They can't just log; they need to be in sort of a high level of quarantine at 100%, or reject, which basically instructs these mailbox receivers to process their mail in a specific way. The next role is to maintain that compliance, because as you can imagine, if you're in the business of sending email to the general public, to constituents, to customers, whatever the case might be, you're doing that for some sort of intent, some sort of value exchange. So you're expecting that email to land. If you bring on a new system, bring on a new ticket management solution, spin up a server in the basement that's going to start sending email on your behalf, these type of changes happen to organizations all the time. If you don't have the telemetry associated with understanding if that email is properly configured and is getting through, you are potentially opening up to a whole bunch of challenges. Now, we have seen organizations who maybe aren't quite sure what's going on. They know their mail is not getting delivered. They know they've got this sort of DMARC thing in reject. The new systems are no longer working. And they say, oh, actually, we can solve it just by rolling back. Let's go back to logging so that we're not in enforcement. And these new emails will go through. And they will. But clearly, what you're actually doing is you're actually regressing your security policy. And that is likely to violate some of the frameworks that you had originally signed up to. So as Kieran mentioned, back in 2017, there was very little requirement, very little guidance around being in DMARC enforcement. In 2025, there are many requirements to be in and maintain your DMARC posture so that your mail continues to be treated in a priority manner by the receiving mailboxes. and of course that you are compliant with all the various frameworks that an organization might be required to be compliant with. And I think this year we're seeing a lot more of those appear: PCI 4.0, DORA. So depending on what legislative framework is most relevant to you, you do need to ensure you maintain in compliance. The second thing, of course, that happens is that in the last 12 months or so, we've seen that as most domains on the internet start to become DMARC compliant by default, we have started to see the bad actors innovate, like they inevitably do. So they look for places where that DMARC compliance can in some way be exploited. Maybe there's configuration grift in your DNS. Maybe you've delegated control of portions of your domain space to some third parties who have then, let's say, gone out of business or made a mistake in their configuration. You've inherited this configuration grift. Your DMARC reports contain a lot of the metadata associated with how organizations or third parties are trying to abuse your assets. Keeping on top of that ensures that everything is working as intended and you are not actually exposed to some of that configuration drift. And ultimately, of course, all of this goes to achieve your security on the internet. You, as a trusted organization, need to ensure that your email gets delivered to your intended recipients in an appropriate way, and some arbitrary third party who might not even be in the same postcode or country as you is not able to trivially exploit and abuse your brand and your reputation.
As I mentioned earlier, Raoul, we at Redshift are already one of the public sector's trusted security partners. Could you tell the audience a bit more about who we already work with and the type of work that we already do?
Yeah, so we are a UK company, so this is very much our patch, and we're clearly aligned with the desire to make the UK the safest place to be online. I'm currently in our Soho office. As you imagine, it's a tech startup, so it's a cool Soho office with a nice skylight up there. Kieran's been here a few times before. And we are heavily incentivized to ensure that we provide these sorts of tools for organizations that have historically had, the complexity required in order to make them deploy this effectively. So, initiatives like digitization and automation at a national scale just will not work across the internet unless we build towards an internet in the UK that is secure by default. So over the years, we've worked with many complex organizations to support adoptions of some of the things that have been challenging. As I said, our home is London, so unsurprisingly, we're deployed with the majority of London councils. But we've obviously worked with organizations up and down the government stack in various ways. And while we do provide end package solutions like our DMARC offer to customers both in the public and the private sector all around the world, we also, of course, have a lot of data and capabilities that we offer to industry partners and have done for many, many years. And many of those capabilities are utilized across many functions, both in the public and private sector, that I think people on this call might already be users of.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about the changes about what MailCheck currently does and how Redshift on DMARC actually compares, because as we mentioned talking to Kieran earlier, support for MailCheck is just changing. It's not being withdrawn completely. So I think it's important to ensure people know what those changes are again, but also show what else is available and actually what opportunity there is for organizations to further improve their security posture. We were talking just before the call about, for example, about MTA STS, and we know that utilization of MTA ASTS across the public sector can be fairly limited because it's a often difficult protocol to deploy. It needs to be hosted somewhere, so you're increasing your attack surface, for example. So people don't necessarily want to take that on or understand quite what they should be doing there with that. So, Raoul, how do Mailcheck and Redshift stack up, and where do you see the opportunity for further improvement of public sector organisation security?
Yeah, sure. Like I mentioned before, of course, we specialize in helping organizations that have some level of complexity deploy. And as a result, we've been working on our cloud SaaS platform continuously with a fairly aggressive roadmap for about 7 years at this point in time. And as a result, we've built a lot of capability and expertise both in product and in the team that supports that. So I think, at a basic level, Mailcheck Cloud SaaS product, we're effectively a Cloud SaaS product. Two, we've been quite ambitious with trying to make all of the protocols that are relevant. So we started with DMARC clearly, but there's a lot more stuff nowadays than there was, in 2017. And you point out MTSTS. That's another very obvious win for people who want a more secure internet by default. So for people who are not aware, MTSTS basically just ensures that every connection to a mail server that you own is encrypted by default if you support encryption, which frankly every organization who's running a mail server in 2025 probably does today. So this prevents things like downgrade attacks where you could basically have a man in the middle who says actually you don't support encryption, so as a result sent everything clear text. You can imagine what the security implications of a man in the middle sniffing a clear text email message would be like today. It's a no-brainer that if there is a technical solution that could prevent this from happening, you want to deploy it. And so unsurprisingly, MTSTS is another one of those things that every sensible security policy in the world says if you can implement it, you should probably be implementing it. Microsoft were actually, ironically, one of the first and early supporters of MTSTS. So they released support back in, I think, 2022. And I think it was the summer of 2022. And because we knew it was coming, we released our own support for MTSTS back in 2022. I think you've generously said that there are challenges implementing it. We know it's a pain. It's a pain to support because you've got to make DNS changes. You've got to host, some JSON files on the web. It's all got to tie up. It's got to make sense, and it's got to be done in a scalable way. We frankly invested the energy to make it easy. You press a button, we figure out what your MX records are, we figure out where you support everything correctly, we advertise the right bit with one DNS change, and it just works. I was actually quite pleased that one of our early adopters said, "Oh wow, this was actually surprisingly easy." We tried that. That's what gets me out of the bed in the morning, right? We make it easy to do the basic things correctly, so that we can get around with the rest of our day. Of course, alongside all of those features and functionalities, obviously we are UK headquartered. We have UK data residency. We have maintained our ISO 27001 for many years. We've been a Cyber Essentials audited for a number of years, and we're available on most of the government procurement platforms as a function of having worked with government in various guises for so long over this period of time. I don't want to spend too much time on the sort of specifics because it's should be pretty familiar for anyone who's used to using one of these platforms. But I think there's some, really interesting things that we've innovated in that some of our users have actually found particularly helpful. So MTSTS is one, of course, but if you pop to the next slide, you see we've actually been very early adopters in helping organizations gain more autonomy over all of this. So there's a bit about education and understanding what these technologies do and how they're helpful. But every organization also tends to be unique. And sometimes organizations want autonomy to understand what is special about them, why they're seeing the things that they're seeing. Can someone help them? And we have great support people. You're more than welcome to talk to them anytime you have a problem. But if maybe you're doing this in the middle of the night, maybe you just want to work with the machine, we have released our own LLM, which is trained against all of the security protocols that we develop and work with. And more importantly, it's integrated with all the data and telemetry that we get both from DMARC and our proprietary data sources and APIs. So you actually are able to investigate and query and have a conversation with an expert agent that knows more about DMARC than you would ever imagine. So these sorts of things actually help organizations take control of their own interface, and so they're not left floundering and confused when they hit the edge conditions around this. And of course, the other thing that we're quite excited about is I'd mentioned DNS drift and DNS configuration issues. We've actually productized around that quite aggressively. So we are able to actually monitor the health of your DNS infrastructure, which is critical to making protocols like DMARC and SPF, DKIM, MTSDS, etc. work effectively. And this gives us continuous monitoring, continuous health checks for that DNS infrastructure. These are all things that, they're new to market. They're not established functionality in the sorts of tools that you might be used to, Mailcheck being an example. But we found that these are really powerful as we want to build for next, not just meet the minimum requirements that are of today.
Great. Thank you, Rahul. Thank you, Kieran. So Rahul, what's next? What for those that have joined today, that are sitting in January, have delayed movement, have delayed a decision on what to do next about these changes? They're coming up. They're going to be live from the 24th of March. So there isn't too much time left, but there is enough time to get started and make the changes. What would you recommend, Rahul, that the audience does now?
Yes, it's very inconvenient when you get notifications of these things right before Christmas, right? And I have a lot of sympathy for that. But at a high level, I would want people to walk away from this knowing that we're here to help, right? We care a lot about this country that birthed us as an organization that we are close to. We have a long history of being helpful to organizations. And we have a bunch of free tools that are out there, so people can look at those tools and understand where they are on the journey if they're not quite fully aware today, who they're reporting to, what their current status is, et cetera. We are offering an extended trial to the end of March to try and make it easy for organizations. We know that a lot of Mailcheck users will be in reject. They'll be worried about making changes or moving configurations around that could have some sort of organizational impact on a really short period of time. So for all our government friends and partners and potential customers, we're happy to extend this trial out so that they can have an easy time understanding what is the right solution for them. And during that process, of course, we have a lot of resources that Billy has access to and can share with the team. Most of them are available digitally, migration guides and the like. Also, of course, we have a lot of experts in the room. We have probably some of the people who work with DMARC deployment for large and complex organizations over the last 6-7 years that have the most miles, as it were, of many people in the world today. So we've seen almost every kind of scenario. So if you're currently struggling with any of this or have concerns of that, we're happy to get one of those experts to chat through. We appreciate there's not a lot of time, but we've done this a lot. And for organizations that feel that they need another solution today with Mailcheck going away, I want to give you my personal promise that we'll make it as easy as we can for you.
And one of the things on that I talk about actually quite a lot is it doesn't matter the scale of the organization that we work with within the public sector, whether it's a smaller arm's length body or whether it's one of the central government departments. The process and the steps that we take to not only make it as simple and as painless as possible, but to mitigate any risks that come from it. That was one of the big things that impressed me when I started to watch on DMARC deployments many years ago with us. How comfortable and how much experience we have, and that just makes it as seamless as possible. So, super. Kieran, Rahul, this is fantastic. We now have a few moments for any questions. So anyone in the audience who has any questions for us, please put them into the chat, and we will ensure that one of our experts do give you the correct answer. So Richard, yes, we are going to send the recording through afterwards, so absolutely you will get access to that. It's pretty quick, normally comes through doesn't take too long for you to come through. You'll get an email notification of that. Thanks very much for asking that question. So we've got the first question has come through, so thank you very much for this question. So and this is one actually we've had other people ask us as we're going through this as well, not just those in the audience today, is what is the migration process from Mailcheck to Redshift like? How do you guarantee a successful implementation? So Raoul, I'm going to give that one to you as usage. You'll give your personal guarantee that we make it as easy as possible. So not to put you on the spot, but from your perspective, how will we help anyone that signs up today ensure that they maintain compliance with DMARC from the 24th of March?
Yeah, so first off, I think it's important for us to get the telemetry from DMARC as quickly as possible. So luckily, when you're designing a protocol for the internet, you try and design it to be as robust as possible. Now, that's not to say that there will be absolutely no issues in all circumstances, but for the most part, I think many users can switch over to basically adding us as a secondary reporter. So they're currently reporting to Mailcheck, whatever tool they may be using at this point in time. We can start to get the telemetry. In the real world, as per the protocol, you're apparently allowed to report to as many reporters as you want. In the real world, we found most reporters limit to 2. So as long as we're one of the first 2 reporting addresses in your DMARC record, we will start to get DMARC telemetry pretty quickly with a trial account. And as I said, we'll keep that trial account going, for this entire quarter, and you can then use that data to build a sense of where you are today in a new tool, so that you don't have sort of data migration issues and those sorts of things that might come up if you leave this till the absolute last moment. That will essentially give us a snapshot of where you are today, and then from that point on, we can look at a tailored plan to actually move the authentication, if it needs to be hosted, if it would benefit from being hosted, those sorts of things across, and then figure out what's going on with, like we said, BIMI, MTSDS, all these new protocols, which one of those actually do need to get ported, which ones are business critical, etc.
I think it's that care that's important, the complexity, even though organizations may have been at reject for some time, you still need to fully understand the traffic, need to fully understand the email sources, and both our aggregate reporting and our forensic reporting will do that. And that kind of answers a question that Richard's put into the chat as well. Richard Ruman, thank you very much for that. We provide, Richard, both detailed aggregate reports and detailed forensic reports on DMARC. Now, naturally, forensic reports being forensic reports, they tend to be fewer in volume, but they do have more detail. But we do provide both of those types of reports in order to provide the telemetry that you need to understand not just how to maintain your compliance, but also for that security operations role that Raoul mentioned earlier on. The information that you're getting from reports is absolutely key in order to do that. And as you mentioned, that information you're getting from the reports, we do see that. In fact, I was talking to a customer yesterday, a new customer that's just joined us, and this is one of their goals, is they want to clean up what they're actually sending from. So what domains and subdomains are they actually sending email from, and what sending sources are there? So you've made a really good point there. Further work to do, cleaning up.
Actually, Billy, I think Richard was asking about some of the more granular reporting. So there are 2 pieces over here. With forensic reports, we have what's called private channel data. So you see sort of different forensic reports with our forensic reporting than you would see on many other platforms, including Mailcheck, because we have, effectively some allow listing that allows certain processes. I think you mentioned Yahoo. Yeah, the Verizon is one of them, to basically send more forensic reports than you would typically get on most other platforms. We are making a release this quarter that is going to provide more granular telemetry specifically for DMARC passes. That might be one of the things that you're looking at, which will give you more granular telemetry on some of the raw reports, because generally we kind of operate in an aggregate level and we look for the right services and which ones are in and out. But as you mentioned, in some of the more esoteric implementations, there's some more detailed telemetry that might be useful for your case. So we expect to release with that detailed telemetry sometime very soon this quarter.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Imran, we had a question from Imran. How did NCSC select Redshift? Just for absolute clarity, we are, one of the options that are available. So NCSC, just to be clear, are not actively promoting Redshift as your only choice. We would love it, obviously, if that was the case, but just for absolute clarity, we are a trusted provider. We are on G-Cloud 14, which is the government's digital marketplace for providing software. As Rahul mentioned, we are UK based, we are UK data centered as well, and we have existing UK government customers as well. So we're not directly promoted by the NCSC, but we are one of the options that's available to UK government customers.
Yeah.
So thanks very much for that question.
And Imran, I think part of that question probably came back to some of the things I said. I mean, in the very different environment of 8-9 years ago when we were looking at these interventions, as we've talked about already, there weren't many, if any, regulatory requirements. There was much less talk about these types of interventions in the sort of best practice playbook, but it was something the government was becoming very interested in, and there weren't very many players. So one of the things that we wanted to do at the NCSC, and we did this very openly, was we talked to as many private sector cybersecurity providers of all shapes, sizes, and ages. Redshift, quite a young company at the time. We did that very transparently and openly. There were these frameworks you mentioned, some of them that Redshift are now on, but it comes back to the point about trying to get as much of this possible into the commercial sector. The only other thing I would say, just to the previous discussion exchanges between Rahul and Richard, again being slightly sort of big picture about it, the purpose of these interventions, going back, I'm sounding very old because I keep talking about the original intent about 7 or 8 years ago, but the original intent is to make these the easy to use interventions. I loved Rahul midway through his remarks earlier said something about investing the energy to make it easy. So there is something, and this is an early part of the dialogue, even though it may be painful for us to hear it. If there are glitches, if there are as when you move on with any service, if there are things that just are less easy to use and so forth, then please please have an open conversation about it, because the whole point of this is that it's an easy improvement to your defenses, and if it's not, then partners need to know about that.
Really great point. Thank you very much, Kieran. Okay, we're coming up on time. Rahul or Kieran, are there any closing remarks, anything that you wanted to cover off today that either I've interrupted you and you've not been able to, or that you've forgotten about, or anything that you've thought about following the questions that have been asked?
Well, I think my closing remarks are the ones I just made. I wanted to repeat that I think this whole Mailcheck, the active cyber defense protections, the getting the basic interface, particularly for the public sector between citizen and service provider, just absolutely critical. Moving to a new phase. New phases bring new opportunities and new possibilities of the odd glitch. So let's get it right and let's keep this conversation going. Also, frankly, what are we going to be talking about in the early 2030s? Let's start thinking about that now, about how to move this on. So really, really good conversation, really great questions. Thank you to everybody who's posted it in the chat, and let's keep going. Rahul?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we're here to try and make this as productive and easy as possible. If there's anything that we can do to make this easier, appreciate it. It's something that people have to deal with in an otherwise very busy schedule. Let us know. Let me know. We will handle any questions that we didn't get a chance to address in voice over email. And of course, my email is publicly available, so you're happy to reach out to me at any point in time if there's anything that we can do to help. Yes, Richard. We'll send confirmation of that, but that would be the way we would choose to configure it.
Great.
The specific question on RUA records and where it should point.
Great.
That would be what we would suggest.
Yeah. Thanks, Richard.
Great.
Great question. Super. Kieran, thank you so much again. Great to see you.
Thank you, Billy. Thank you,
so much indeed. Thanks, more importantly, to everyone that's joined today. I hope you found that useful. The recording will be sent out. Just a reminder, if you would like to get started, sign up for your extended trial. This is free of charge until the end of March, so the 31st of March. Sign up there, and a member of the team will get in touch and begin your onboarding straight away. Thanks so much for joining, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.